Welcome to another episode of Mike's Money Picks. Today on the podcast, we're going to be breaking down the Saturday night slate for week 4 of the 2024 college football season. So this is Saturday, September 21st at the 7 p.m. Eastern time slate. If you're looking for the main slate, scroll a little bit down on the channel feed on YouTube and on the audio feed. You will find that there. We record that when Tuesday night is now Thursday night. You can also check out the Friday night slate if you're listening to this before Friday, because we did do a preview for the Friday night slate as well. So we will have all the big DFS slates for week 4 covered. Make sure you subscribe to the channel. That way you can be with us for the rest of college football season, because what you're going to get is exactly what you're going to get here on this episode. We're going to run all 8 games of the night slate, tell you what we expect from each game, who we like and who we don't like in DFS, and give you some ideas for constructing your lineups in a way that can help you win some money on DraftKings as well as FanDuel. Obviously, we're focusing on DraftKings, but all of my thoughts and takes you can apply to FanDuel as well. Just some of the pricing is a little bit different, and you have to keep in mind that it's half-point PPR scoring and only 7 players on the roster. Anyway, if these videos help you out in any way, please show me some support by liking it on YouTube. If you're listening on audio, you can rate and review the podcast. Those help me out a ton. They help the show get noticed, help attract viewers, more subscribers, and just help grow the community. And I really do appreciate when you guys do that. I cannot stress that enough. All right, so we've got 8 games to talk about here, and this is not going to be a super long show because I think there's a few games on this slate that you can just put an X right through because they're just going to be ugly game environments with ugly players in them. Well, not ugly physically, like that'd be a little weird for me to say, but like ugly from a DFS perspective, like just a lot of guys that are not really the sexy plays in DFS. So, we're going to go a little quicker through those. We're not going to waste your time. If a guy's not, we're going to say he's not a play and we're going to move on. But anyway, we got 8 games to get to. So let's go ahead and get started with the showdown in South Florida. All right, so game number 1 is arguably the best one for DFS purposes. We've got Miami heading over to Tampa to take on South Florida. And shockingly enough, this could be a game between, if we're being honest, 2 of the top 3 teams in the state of Florida. I think right now it's Miami, USF, and UCF. Obviously, the Gators and the Seminoles have a lot to say about that, but they've been colossal disappointments so far this season. So Miami and USF and UCF have not. So this is going to be an interesting one. And Vegas seems to think so as well. Miami is 16.5-point favorites. That's not the interesting part, though. The total is 64.5 points, meaning that the implied score is about 40-24 in favor of the Hurricanes. This is the highest game total on the entire night slate. This makes Miami the highest team total on the entire night slate. So let's break it down. So y'all, I got all ready for this Saturday show this week. Come on here and talk quarterbacks. And I was going to declare that Arch Manning was the best QB play on this night slate. And then DraftKings did my Longhorns dirty. They didn't put him on the night slate. I know they're playing UL Monroe, but they put him on the night slate for UTSA last week. So why can't they put him on there for UL Monroe this week and let everybody play Arch, right? I was disappointed. But with Arch Manning not being on the slate, I think Cam Ward is the top quarterback option on the entire slate. If you were to ask me, hey, Mike, who's the quarterback who is going to score the most fantasy points on this Saturday night slate, my answer would be Cam Ward, easily. Now, here's the problem. He's priced at $10,000. So when you do the math, right, in terms of what you need for value from a DFS perspective, you need at least 3 times their salary. So if he's $10K, we need at least 30 points out of him. However, in all likelihood, Cam Ward is going to get 30 points. I said the name of a golfer there, not the name of a quarterback. Cam Ward is likely to get 30 points. He's done it in all 3 games so far this season. He's been over 300 yards in all 3 games this season. He's been 3 touchdowns or higher in all 3 games this season. He has accounted for 12 of Miami's 20 touchdowns, and I got to be honest, that rate is probably more if you include like the not fourth quarters of these blowout games. So this is a guy where when his team total is about 40, and, they're probably going to score 5 or 6 touchdowns. He's probably going to get 3 or 4 of them, and he's probably going to throw for 300-plus yards. It starts getting real easy when you start doing the math of him to actually get to 30 points in hit value. I think he's a very safe play who also has a high ceiling, and I think there's enough salary savers out there on this slate that you can play Cam Ward with confidence, even at a salary of 5 figures at $10,000 even. At the running back spot, look, I'm just not interested for Miami. They've kind of shown who they are, right? Like, 3 games in the season, you kind of know what a team wants to do offensively. And even in games that they've been winning easily, Damian Martinez, their starting running back, has not seen a ton of volume. He just hasn't. And part of the problem is that they're just not a run-first team anymore with Cam Ward. Part of the problem is also that Mark Fletcher Jr. is back in the fold, and they are just a committee. Like Martinez is the 1A, Fletcher's the 1B. But Fletcher's been a little more effective this season, but he doesn't get enough volume to really pay it off in terms of DFS. So I'm just not interested in this backfield. Might you make the argument that Martinez is a leverage play against Cam Ward. I would agree with that, but I just don't think on paper it sets up all that well for him. At the wide receiver position for Miami, it is pretty straightforward. Restrepo is the volume king in this offense. He was last year. He will continue to be this year. And I think he's one of the best receivers in the country. He doesn't traditionally beat people deep and catch bombs, but he just gets volume after volume after volume. And, every now and then he'll make one guy miss after the catch and, able to turn into a long one, or he'll sneak behind the defense and catch a post or a crosser or something and break off a big play that way. But he just does it in a variety of ways. He's going to be the most targeted receiver. A Ward Restrepo stack is pretty expensive, but I also think it's pretty darn likely to hit value when you consider the fact that Restrepo has been over 19 fantasy points in all 3 games so far this season, and they haven't been close. He hasn't really played all 4 quarters in all 3 games this season. Now, after Restrepo, the pecking order is Jacoby George and then Sam Brown. Look, I think you can double stack Cam Ward. I think you can make an argument for that. And if you're going to do it, then I think George and Brown would certainly be the 2 guys that you'd want to go with. I would lean George over Brown personally, but I think that either of them could hit value, right? We're saying that Cam Ward, why do I keep doing that, is going to throw for 3 or 4 touchdowns. Well, not all of them are going to go to Restrepo. One of them is going to go to George Brown or somebody else. So Horton is another guy that could capitalize on that. He is playing quite a bit. He's had at least 3 catches in all 3 games. And then you have the tight end Elijah Arroyo, who has scored a touchdown in each of the last 2 games. Been over 8 fantasy points in all 3 games as their starting tight end. So I don't mind him either. I don't think he has the same ceiling as one of the starting 3 receivers, but he is definitely a guy you could go to save a little bit of salary. On the UCF side, I actually think that you could go with a full game stack and go Cam Ward on one side and Byron Brown as your quarterback on the other. Reason why, he's only $6,700, and this is too cheap for a player of Byron Brown's caliber, right? He is a dual threat. He is going to see probably north of 15 rushing attempts in this one. He is going to see probably north of 30 passing attempts in this one. This is a guy where they're going to run an up-tempo offense. They're going to be aggressive. Yes, he has his issues with accuracy, but he makes up for it by being a dual threat. And dual threat quarterbacks are what I like to play in DFS because their ceiling is so much higher. And you can even argue that their floor is so much higher because even if they're not getting it done in the passing game, they're going to be able to get you fantasy points with their legs. Love him as a play at 6,700. And like I said, I think you can make a compelling argument for a full game stack playing both Ward and Brown. Now, at the running back spot, USF does have a 3-man committee between Kelly Joyner as well as Naquan Wright. And I believe Western Kentucky transferred Teron Keith. I'm pretty sure he went to a MAC school and then Western Kentucky. But they're all 3 a factor. They're all 3 going to get carries in this backfield. In terms of handicapping which one, Naquan Wright was supposed to be the starter at the start of the season. He's the one that had the most carries last week against Southern Miss. That would be my lean, but I do think you could avoid this situation altogether if you wanted to. At the wide receiver spot for USF, because of Brown's mobility, I don't think you have to stack him. However, all his wide receivers are so cheap that it makes it very cost-effective to stack him. Sean Atkins is the very clear stacking partner. He's had 23 targets so far this season. And he is the guy that, back during best ball season, everybody was drafting as the stacking partner with Byron Brown. I think he will be that guy. Just hasn't really turned into a big game yet. The other 2 starters are Brown Stevens and Yassine. And Yassine has kind of been the more productive of the 2 in terms of a catches and yards perspective. He's just yet to score a touchdown. But really, those 3 will be the guys that I would consider as a stacking partner with Byron Brown. And like I said, I don't think you have to do it. But if you're looking to save yourself some salary, those are very easy options, easy ways to save yourself some salary and get you a guy that is correlated with a quarterback that's already on your roster. I probably would not be playing Brown Stevens or Yassine as one-off plays. I do think I could get to Atkins as a one-off play because I do expect him to command a ton of volume in this USF offense. Next up, we've got Cal heading to Doak Campbell Stadium, or if you followed any of the Cal fans on Twitter, they're getting really funny. They're kind of making fun of how liberal their school is. They're referring to Doak Campbell Stadium as Woke Campbell Stadium because they say that they're going to take it over. They've also called Auburn's War Eagle the Peace, Love, and Inclusion Eagle, which is, I think, and it's all in good fun. Anyway, this is probably one of the games that we've covered this week that has had the biggest change in spread from where it was in the preseason to where it is now. FSU is only 2.5-point favorites in this game. The total is 44.5 points, meaning the projected score is about 23-21 in favor of FSU. And look, Cal's not a bad team. I think that they're a pretty reasonable team to target in DFS, but the problem is their guys are just too expensive. Fernando Mendoza, the conquistador himself. He's actually a conquistador, but it just sounds like the name of somebody when you learned in history class of the conquistadors. It just really sounds like one. He's their starting quarterback. He's got a very low ceiling to me. He just doesn't really fire the ball deep down the field, doesn't really have a whole lot of rushing upside. And in a game where his team's implied 21 points, doesn't have a whole lot of touchdown upside. So he just doesn't check off a lot of boxes for me. And you got to pay $7,200 for all those unchecked boxes. So I'm kind of out on Fernando Mendoza for this slate. If he were cheaper or if he had a better matchup, I would be. Now, Jaden Ott is the workhorse running back for this team. He has been kind of banged up so far this season. If he plays, I don't think this is the worst matchup. FSU's defensive line has looked atrocious this season. And if he's 100%, he's going to get a huge workload. But he's really expensive. I would rather pay up at the quarterback or the wide receiver position than pay up for Jaden Ott at $8,800 personally. If we get word that Ott is out, Javian Thomas is one of the top running back plays on the slate. He's only $5,000. He was the workhorse last week against San Diego State with Ott out, and he turned it into 21.3 fantasy points. I think Ott plays. I don't know if he's 100% or not, but if Ott plays, he's going to get in a little bit of my lineups, but not a lot. If Ott is out, Javian Thomas is going to be in a lot of my lineups. The wide receiver spot, Cal's got some injuries going on to Merriweather and Grays, which leaves their starting core of Hunter and Grizel. They're just not a high-volume passing offense, but the good news is a lot of it has gone to Neziah Hunter. If you were to play anybody from this Cal offense in terms of the passing game, Neziah Hunter would be the guy. He's only $5,700 on DraftKings. And then on the FSU side, it is really hard for me to convince myself that this offense, after I've watched it for 3 games now, is going to score 23 points, but that's what they're implied to score in this one. DJ Uiagalelei. This is like the ultimate buy low spot for him. He is playing a defense that I don't perceive to be all that great. He is priced down at $6,100. And this is a guy that when he was at Clemson, we saw have huge games. You know, he had that breakout game where he threw for over 400 yards against Notre Dame back during the COVID season. He had some big games in 2021 as well. Like, this is a guy who, if he still has it in him, this would be a spot to target him. No one's going to play him. He's very cheap. He's got a decent matchup. I've said it multiple times on the show again, but I generally play a 20 max. Sometimes I even, make it a 40 total lineups and play 220 maxes. He's going to get in at least 1 or 2 of my lineups because I think that there's still a chance in there that he could be good. I'm not saying it's likely, but I'm saying it's possible. At the running back spot, Roydell Williams has led in carries in each of the first 3 games for Florida State. When you total them up, that is, not in each game. To me, he's still the 1A in this backfield, but $5,000 is a reasonable price tag. I don't think the matchup is perfect. I don't think it's awful either. But the bottom line is, if this team's projected to score 23 points, they got to come from somewhere. And Roydell Williams would be a very likely candidate on the ground. At the wide receiver spot, Jaylen Brown being questionable definitely opens up some doors. If he does miss, then I do think you're going to see more concentrated targets to Benson and Douglas. I think you're going to see more Kentron Poitier as well. But it's really hard to talk yourself into these guys based off the production that they've shown in the first 3 games. You would really be banking on DJU to have a better outing in this one, which is why I think the main way I'm going to get to these Florida State pass catchers is with stacking partners is DJU. Unless we get word that Jaylen Brown is out, I do think you could play Benson or Douglas as a one-off if Jaylen Brown is in fact out for this game. All right, that's going to do it for the first 2 games. Let's go ahead and take a quick breather, and then let's go ahead and break down. Now, before we carry on, I do want to mention that there are ways you can get more information from me. First off, you can reach out to me on Twitter at Mike's Money Picks. Give me a follow on there if you want to as well. I'm recording this on Thursday night. I forgot what day of the week it was. And so, if any of my opinions change in between now and then, I kind of try to tweet them out. But, if not, if you want to get my thoughts on a player, start, sit, lineup questions, feel free to reach out to me on Twitter. I'm also in the Fantasy Corner Discord. The link is in the description as on audio as well as on YouTube. Basically, the Fantasy Corner Discord is a great community of people who are very smart, very good people who just kind of talk play, talk strategy all day long and sweat it out together once the kickoff actually starts. It's a blast to be a part of that community. And if you're looking for more people to talk DFS with, I cannot recommend that enough. Also, if you want to know who actually makes all my DFS lineups, head on over to the Patreon, patreon.com/Mike's Money Picks. I write a full core article for every college football DFS slate where I profile my core plays, as well as the reason why they're my core plays. So you can get a lot of sound logic, research, reasoning from somebody who knows college football DFS very well, and you can use that to help your own process get better at your own college football DFS game. All right, so let's go ahead and carry on with game number 3, which is going to be a battle in the Big Ten between Northwestern and Washington. Yeah, the new Big Ten just still doesn't really feel right to me. But anyway, Washington is 10.5-point favorites in this game with a game total of only 42.5 points, meaning the projected score is about 26-16 in favor of the Huskies. And look, this is just not a great game environment, right? Northwestern is going to play slow. They're not going to score a lot of points. They transition from Mike Wright to Jack Losh at quarterback against Eastern Illinois. He showed a little bit of rushing upside. He didn't run for 62 yards in that game, but other than that, it was just kind of a wholly unimpressive stat line considering that they were going up against an FCS opponent. Just not really all that interested. His team's projected to score 16 points. That means they're probably going to get, 2 touchdowns? Just not interested. At running back, the one guy that I would say on Northwestern is kind of game flow proof is Cam Porter. He is a workhorse running back. He does get usage in the passing game. He is their workhorse, and he will be on the field quite a lot. 5,200 is not the best in the world. If he were 4,500, he would be in a lot more of my lineups. At the wide receiver position, Northwestern really does only throw it to 2 guys. A.J. Henning was wide receiver 1 in Losh's only start, had 7 targets in that game. Obviously he was against an FCS opponent. And then Bryce Kurtz is the other guy that they will throw to quite a bit. He had 6 catches against Miami, Ohio. He had to score a touchdown on the season, kind of a little unlucky in that regard. So maybe if you want to include somebody from this Northwestern passing game, you can go to one of those 2. They're going to be trailing in this game, and you know where the targets are going to go. I don't think they're the worst plays on the slate, but it's still not comfortable clicking a Northwestern guy. Now, Washington is a whole lot better. Will Rogers is at quarterback. And look, he's okay. I'd just rather have other guys. I think there's better value plays. I think there's better spend-up plays. This is a guy who gives you 0 rushing upside. He's got negative 30 rushing yards on the season. And you're going to need him to throw for 300 yards. You're going to need him to get multiple touchdowns to hit value. And really, there's not super-duper clear stacking partners for him. I just don't think that it's a great spot. Pass. At the running back spot, Jonah Coleman has been their guy. However, he did tail off a little bit in terms of his production against Washington State. First 2 games against weak competition had over 20 fantasy points. Then he gets to play a real team and only has 12.2. They are projected to win this game by double digits. He's going to see probably 15 to 20 touches. I don't think he's a terrible play, but I think there's better plays out there. At the wide receiver spot, there's good news and bad news with Washington. The good news is they only throw to 3 guys. The bad news is you don't have a dang clue which one of those three guys is going to go off on any given game. Giles Jackson was the most productive receiver in week 3 against Washington State. So if I had to handicap it going forward, I'd obviously prefer the guy who had the most targets, most production against the best opponent, right? So that would be Giles Jackson. Unfortunately, DraftKings had that same thought as well. They priced him up way above the other 2 receivers, Denzel Boston and Jeremiah Hunter. Boston, was the most targeted last week against Washington State. He had 11 targets in that game. Caught 8 for 58, just not like a super big play receiver, has not had a catch over 20 yards yet this season. He'd be a volume-based play, and I don't think there's going to be a whole lot of volume in a game where they're double-digit favorites. Northwestern plays at a snail's pace. Jeremiah Hunter is the 3rd wideout, and I think he's a decent pivot in DFS because I don't think he's actually that far behind the other 2 in terms of production. I think when you look at the end of the season, they're going to be pretty closely grouped together. So I don't think that Hunter's a bad option when you consider that you're getting not a bad option at the price, right? Now, next game up, we've got Tennessee taking on Oklahoma. Tennessee is 7.5-point favorites with a game total of 56.5 points, meaning the projected total is about 32 to 25 in favor of the Volunteers. Let's go ahead and talk about Tennessee. So their quarterback is Nico Iamaleava. Nailed it. So Nico, to me, is a great option on this slate. I like him a lot, but he's really difficult to stack. Right? You think back to the NC State game, he scored 26 fantasy points in that game. Solid performance, right? But really, you couldn't stack him. The production was spread out among so many wide receivers, and so many of the quote unquote scrubs scored touchdowns as opposed to the big targets that he just really made him unstackable. And I kind of see that being the case here again today. That he's got kind of 2 of the traits that we look for when we don't want to stack quarterbacks, which means he has rushing upside. Typically, mobile quarterbacks don't get stacked. And he spreads the ball around to a ton of receivers. Typically, quarterbacks who do that, we don't want to stack them with their wide receivers. So to me, Nico is a great play. I think you can play him stacked or unstacked, but my lean early on is towards unstacked. At the running back position, Dylan Sampson has been one of the best backs in all of college football to start the season in terms of production. He's been over 34 fantasy points in all games so far, over 100 yards in all games so far, multiple touchdowns in all games so far. This is going to be the best defense that he's played against. Actually, I don't even know if that's accurate. NC State's defense is not awful, but Tennessee just kind of ran through them. So I don't know what to make of it. I do think that he's in a pretty good spot, and I think that if you're not paying up to play Nico at quarterback, I think that Sampson at running back is a pretty solid option, especially on FanDuel. I think he's more cost-effective on FanDuel than DraftKings. At the wide receiver spot, it's a mess, right? It's kind of what we talked about with, it being super tough to figure out. Squirrel White's the most expensive one because he's the guy who kind of came into the season with the highest expectations and with the most fanfare. He just hasn't really turned it into a whole lot. He broke off the big play against NC State, but it wasn't a touchdown, so it was only worth 5.5 fantasy points, only 8.7 on the day, as opposed to if he finds the end zone, it's worth instantly 6 points more, right? Chris Brazell has been the most targeted receiver on the season. I would lean towards Brazell if I were targeting anybody for this receiver spot for Tennessee, just basing it off of a numbers game and the guy who's going to get the targets, right? Dante Thornton Jr. is a big play waiting to happen. If he breaks off a big play, great. If he doesn't, you're getting likely a goose egg. Holden Stays is the tight end transfer from Notre Dame. He's okay. Nimrod is going to play a little bit of snaps. Not my favorite. Brew McCoy does start. He just hasn't really gotten going yet this season. He's only $3,300. I think there's worse punt plays out there than a guy who starts on a good offense, and we've seen do it before, right? So, that's the Tennessee receivers. Like I said, it's a mess. On the Oklahoma side, Jackson Arnold showed us some of the dual threat upside that we kind of heard about from him coming out of high school last week. Ran 14 times for 97 yards and 2 touchdowns against Tulane, led him to a 32 fantasy point performance, and that's ideal for what you want out of Jackson Arnold, right? You want him to be a dual threat. You want him to run for touchdowns. That is how he can reach fantasy success. I think it's likely to be a shootout, right? I think it's quite likely that if Oklahoma scores a lot of touchdowns, it's going to come from either the arms or the legs of Arnold. So I think that if you're looking to game stack this game, I definitely would want to get both quarterbacks. And I think you can make a compelling argument that they don't really have to be stacked with a whole lot of other players. At the running back spot for Oklahoma, look, it's a committee. I want no part of it. Last game, it was Barnes, Tatum, and then Sawchuk in terms of the number of carries. I think I'm just going to take a wait and see approach with this one. I'm not going to play them this week. And if one of these guys starts to emerge or the usage starts to develop into a little bit more of a pattern, then maybe I can start playing them. But as of right now, they're all a hard pass. To me, Sawchuk, though, if you're looking to play in GPPs, Sawchuk is a GPP option because we've seen it from him before. He can break off a long run at any time, and that would instantly pay off his salary now that he's at $5,200 on DraftKings. At the wide receiver position, it's interesting for Oklahoma because Deion Burks has been a volume king, 12 targets last week, caught 7 of them for 80 yards. And really, he's been just a double-digit target guy all season long, right? So the volume has been there for Deion Burks. He's been a pretty solid play because of it. Here's the problem, though. Nick Anderson is going to be back this week. He was a real big red zone threat last year for Oklahoma, caught a lot of touchdowns. I think he's going to take away some of those targets from Deion Burks. So I don't think you're going to get the same level of volume for Burks. I think that makes him a little bit overpriced. Anderson at $5,200 is definitely worth a flyer because outside of Anderson, you've still got some other injuries for the receivers. Farouk is going to be out. Andrew Anthony is banged up. Brendan Thompson was questionable coming into this one, but now it says he's going to play. So with all the other injuries happening, I do think that Burks and Anderson do get a little bit of a boost. Those are the two guys that I would want to play, or you can play the tight end Bauer Sharp as well. Next game up, Iowa versus Minnesota with the highest projected total on the slate. Kidding. It's got the lowest projected total on the slate. Iowa is 2.5-point favorites in this game. The game total is 35.5 points, meaning that the projection is 19-17 in favor of Iowa. Look, anytime your game total is less than the total for Thursday Night Football, you're doing something wrong. Neither of these teams are very good offensively, and it shows. Iowa's got Cade McNamara, quarterback, and look, he's Cade McNamara. We've seen him play for 4 years now. He is what he is. I don't think a big game is likely. Running back Caleb Johnson, I think if anybody were to have a big game for Iowa, it would be him because he gets fed the rock. 25 carries in back-to-back games, 30-plus fantasy points in back-to-back games. He's expensive, though. I would rather pay up for Dylan Sampson than him, but if you're playing anybody from the Iowa side, let it be him. The wide receiver spots, their wide receivers in terms of productivity, Vanderzee, Gill, and Lachey. I'm avoiding this passing attack, though I'm not playing any of them. On the Minnesota side, Brosmer is still way overpriced. He has shown us no indication in 3 games so far that he can hit value for that price tag. He's not a high volume passer. He's not a runner. This is not an offense that's going to score a lot of touchdowns. He's just a full fade for me at that salary of $7,700 with what he's done and in this game environment. At the running back position, Darius Taylor is great. Won me some money last week against Nevada, 42 fantasy points. Here's the problem. Going up against Iowa, one of the best defenses in the nation. And again, I would rather pay up for Dylan Sampson for $500 more than to play Darius. But because of the amount of times he's going to touch the ball, he does he's going to make my player pool, right? Like I can play him in a lineup or two, but not a whole lot. The wide receiver spot for Minnesota, we have seen teams kind of dink and dunk their way against this Iowa defense through the years. If Minnesota did, Daniel Jackson will be the guy. He is very clearly their number 1 wide receiver. Hasn't really had a big-time game yet because he hasn't scored a touchdown yet. But I definitely think that he is in play, might make one of my lineups. Next up, we have the Baylor Bears heading to Boulder to take on Colorado. And this one's interesting to me, and the line is interesting to me. Colorado is 1.5 point favorites. The game total is 51.5 points, meaning the projected total is about 26 to 25 in favor of Colorado. Look, I think, just personally, I think Colorado wins this game. I do. Don't kill me. I know anything you say about Colorado is controversial at this point because they are what they are, right? They're the social media team. I think that Colorado has distinct weaknesses on the lines on both sides of the ball and with their depth in terms of if a game gets going with enough tempo and a team kind of grinds them down. I think that that's their weaknesses. I don't think Baylor is the type of team to exploit those weaknesses. So I think Colorado wins this one, and I think that Colorado puts up a lot of points in this one. On the Baylor side, they can put up points too. This Colorado defense is not great. DeQuan Finn, if he plays, is a bargain at $5,800. He was a dual threat at Toledo. I do still consider him a dual threat at Baylor. Just hasn't really gotten going yet this season. But if he does, $5,800 against a not great defense against Colorado, I like it. At the running back position, you've got a kind of a 3-way committee. Reese is the number 1, though. He had 8 carries against Air Force, did score a touchdown. He was out-carried by 1 by Richardson, but when you just look at the production, Reese has just been better and more effective. So Reese at $4,000, again, for a Colorado team that is not great on the defensive line, I don't mind it. I think he's a pretty solid value play. I think you can play him as a one-off play too. At the wide receiver spot for Baylor, this is where it gets hazy. I don't really know how to predict this one. Cameron's going to play. Baldwin has been at Baylor for seemingly forever. He's going to play. Ashton Hawkins would be the one I would hedge my bet on. 5 targets, caught 4 of them for 81 yards against Air Force last week. I kind of think he's trending in the direction of being this offense's number 1 wide receiver. Michael Trigg is the tight end. He's actually pretty darn talented. I don't think he's a poor option at $3,500, but there's just a lot of unknowns for this Baylor receiving core, and I think you can avoid it altogether because, like I said, I don't think that that's how you want to attack this Colorado defense. Now, speaking of Colorado, Shedeur Sanders. I've kind of been down on him in DFS this year, and I think this is a game where I can get back on him, in terms of actually playing him, right? There's not a whole lot of pay-up options on this slate that are all that great. I think at $9,600, I would rate him slightly below Cam Ward, but I think that that's pretty darn likely that he gets you to 3x value. He just has a narrower pathway to doing it because he has 0 rushing upside. And he really needs touchdowns in order to do it, right? But this is a team that's not going to run the ball. If they're going to score points, it's going to be via the arm of Shedeur Sanders and not via the legs of Shedeur Sanders. At the running back spot, Dallin Hayden is currently questionable. Welch led him in carries last week. Offerdahl is still there also, but they don't have enough rushing volume to play. Just pass. At the wide receiver spot, look, I kind of keep hating on Travis Hunter as a DFS play, and he kind of just keeps churning out great performances. I got to say, if Colorado were better, he would get my Heisman vote right now. What he does to me is incredible. You have high school kids that, with the intensity of a high school football game, can't play both ways. And Travis Hunter is doing it at the college level, the FBS level, doing it at a high level. It's really impressive stuff, in my opinion. So if he's going to continue to be a full-time receiver, we need to start considering him because it's very clear that Shedeur Sanders is looking his way at 14 targets against Colorado State. If he's going to get 14 targets again, he can still pay off that price tag at $9,900. Now, in terms of the other receivers in this offense, who the other 3 are going to play. It's going to be Horn, West, and Shepard. figuring out the combination of which one or two of those four guys goes off is kind of difficult. But if you're playing enough lineups, you can get all combinations of the four, or all combinations of one of the four, of two of the four, right? Like it's certainly possible. Jimmy Horn would be my second in line just because of the volume that he's seen, early in the season. Looked great against North Dakota State, kind of unlucky against Nebraska and Colorado State. He was targeted 7 times against Colorado State, just only turned it into 6 fantasy points. LeJontay Wester did see 7 targets in that game as well. He just turned his into 2 touchdowns. So I do like both Horn and Wester. I think they're very clearly 2 and 3 in this receiving room. And then Will Shepherd, don't count him out either. 7 catches against Colorado State, has not scored a touchdown on the season. He's only $4,000. He needs so much less production to hit value than the other two. I think the way I'm going to attack this is I'm going to play like one of Hunter, Horn, or Wester with Shepherd when I want to double stack these receivers, because that makes the price a whole lot more palatable. Next up, we have got Michigan State taking on Boston College, and I believe this is the Boston College red bandana game where they wear the special uniforms, the red bandana pattern, super cool uniforms, super cool tribute. They tend to play very well in this game as well. Currently, Boston College is 6.5-point favorites. The total is 45.5 points, meaning the projected score is about 26-19 in favor of Boston College. And look, for Michigan State, Aiden Childs is their quarterback. He's not at a bad price, in my opinion. $7,000 is kind of reasonable for what he's put out there so far. He did show us that he has a ceiling against Maryland when he scored 27 fantasy points. This game could turn into a shootout. I don't think it's likely, but I think it's possible. And he's a guy that's going to make my player pool. At the running back spot, unfortunately, you've got a total split of carries between Nate Carter and Katron Lynch-Adams. Carter was supposed to be the guy coming into the season, but Katron Lynch-Adams has kind of been more effective. I would probably lean towards Lynch-Adams personally. At the wide receiver spot, you do have some guys who have had some breakout games for Michigan State. It was in the Maryland game, Nick Marsh with the huge breakout game, 8 catches, 194 yards in that game. Turned it into 36 fantasy points, just a great performance. He's only $4,400. Montorie Foster has also seen double-digit targets in multiple games so far this season. I think he's worth a look as well. And then, with Brown being out, Glover had a big game against Maryland. He's questionable. If he does not play, that's going to open up some work for Antonio Gates Jr. Jack Velling is the starting tight end. But really, I think you can keep it with Foster and Marsh, and I think you can play them as one-off plays, as game stack plays, or as stacking partners with Aiden Childs. On the Boston College side, Thomas Castellanos is their quarterback. Very exciting player, very fun to watch. He is a big-time dual threat with a lot of rushing upside. Hasn't really shown it in either of the last 2 games, but even still, he's been a productive passer in all really every game this season except for Florida State. But Florida State, he was such a good runner, he made up for it, right? That's what you get with Thomas Castellanos. He tends to have either the pass game or the run game going for him. And against Michigan State, he can do both, and he's expensive at $8,800, but I don't mind him. I think he's going to be a little under-owned with guys like Nico getting more ownership, Jackson Arnold getting a lot of ownership as well. So I do like Castellanos at $8,800 this week. At the running back spot, it's a committee between Ward and Robichaux. Both of them had exactly 6 carries last game. And usually when you look to break ties for a committee at the running back position, you either want the guy who's going to get passing work, or you want the guy who's going to break off big runs. And ideally it's the same person. For Boston College, it's the exact opposite. Ward gets the usage in the passing game. Robichaux is more likely to break off long runs. It's not an optimal situation to target. The wide receiver spot, Lewis Bond has continued to be the most targeted receiver in this offense, kind of carrying it over from last year. I don't think you have to stack Castellanos because of how much he runs, but Bond is a very cheap stacking partner that you got to figure is going to be the number one option in the passing game. He's just kind of been unlucky. He's only scored 1 touchdown so far this season. Jaron Bradley did catch a touchdown pass last week, as did Reed Harris, as did Kamari Morales. So you kind of had 3 randoms score touchdowns last week for this Boston College team. If one of them went to Bond, I'd be like, everybody would be all over Bond this week, right? So if you're playing enough lineups, you can take some shots at these random guys like Bradley, like Harris, like Morales, but Bond is the wide receiver 1. Don't get it twisted. Now, last game of the night, and it's an ugly one. We got Purdue taking on Oregon State. Oregon State is 5.5-point favorites with a game total of 49.5, meaning the projected total is about 27-22 in favor of the Beavers. Hudson Card for Purdue. I don't really know what to make of him yet, because against Indiana State, an FCS opponent, he looked great. Against Notre Dame, one of the best defenses in the nation, he looked awful. That's really all we have to go by for this Purdue offense. So it's really hard to gauge where they're at. Hudson Card is one of the cheaper starting quarterbacks on this slate at only $5,700. I think he's worth a look because this team is an air raid team. They're going to throw it all over the yard as long as the game stays close. And $5,700 is very cheap. It allows you to do a lot with the rest of your lineup. At the running back spot, Devin Mockabee is going to be the primary rusher for this team. Again, it's really hard to gauge his production through 2 games, but what I can gauge is that price tag, and $4,000 is quite cheap on DraftKings. Playing one of these 2 guys for Purdue allows you to do a lot. And oh, by the way, Purdue's top 2 receivers, the actual receiver Edgerine and the tight end Claire, are both under $4,000. So, if you're looking to stack up Hudson Card, it's a super cheap stack if you play one of those 2. I would keep it just to those 2 personally, unless you know something I don't. I think those are going to continue to be primary 2 weapons in this passing offense. But again, it's been so hard to gauge them because of their opponents so far this season. Oregon State, DraftKings finally priced down Giovanni McCoy. He has just been not great so far this season. Jabari Johnson did come in late in their last game and complete a pass, but McCoy has been the starter. So I think McCoy's going to continue to start, but it hasn't been good, and I don't think it's going to be good this game. $5,500 is a cheap price tag, but I'd rather play Hudson Card for $200 more for an offense that I know is going to pass. Now, why do I not think Oregon State's going to pass? Because they got 2 running backs who are really good, and they're going to give the rock quite a lot. Anthony Hankerson, has been the best back in this offense this season. 15 carries against Oregon, 2 touchdowns in that game, also caught 6 passes. So when you can put up 27 fantasy points against Oregon, you can put up a lot of fantasy points against anybody. Love him at $6,300 this week. Jam Griffin is kind of the second back in this offense, only had 7 carries against Oregon. They were really looking like a 50-50 committee until that Oregon game, and now it kind of seems clear that when push comes to shove and they're playing real competition, Hankerson is the guy you want. At the wide receiver spot, there's only one guy I'm playing. It's Trent Walker. He's very cheap. He was chalk last week when they played Oregon. Still caught 8 passes for 68 yards, 14 fantasy points, and you walked away a happy camper if you played him, right? I think he's another option here this week. He's the only option in this Oregon State passing game that I would be getting to, however. All right, but that's going to do it for this slate, y'all. That's going to do it for all 8 games. Hopefully we gave you guys plenty of information to help build your lineups for this 8-game slate. As a reminder, if you do want more from me, follow me on Twitter at Mike's Money Picks. Join the Fantasy Corner Discord. Get the articles on the Patreon if that's something you're interested in. And if this video helped you out in any way, please hit the like button. It really does help me out a ton when you guys do that, and I really do appreciate it. Cannot stress enough how important that is for me and helping grow this channel, helping grow this podcast. So that's going to do it for this episode, y'all, and that's going to do it for this week of college football DFS. We talked Friday, we talked Saturday main, we talked Saturday night. Go check out those videos if those slates haven't started yet already. But we've got everything covered this week, y'all, and we're looking forward to another week next week. So make sure you're subscribed to the channel so that way you can be with us next week as well. But best of luck to you guys in all of the CFB DFS contests this week. Thank you guys for watching and listening, and I will see you guys next time.